The scorching Afghan sun hammered down on forward operating base Sentinel like a physical weight. Captain Magdalene Thorne lay motionless on the observation platform, her rifle scope trained on a compound half a mile distant. 22 hours in position. 22 hours without moving more than necessary to breathe and adjust for wind. At 5'3" and 116 pounds, she didn't look like America's most lethal female sniper. She looked like someone's younger sister, someone's daughter. That was exactly the point. 43 confirmed kills. The number meant something different to everyone. To the Pentagon, it was a statistic. To the families of the soldiers she'd saved, it was everything. To her, it was simply the cost of keeping people alive. Wind's shifting again, Master Sergeant Duncan MacLeod muttered beside her dome. At 54, the Scottish-American spotter had more years in combat than most soldiers had alive. His weathered face showed the map of 3 decades: Panama, Gulf War, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. 2 clicks left, holding steady at 15 miles per hour. Maggie made the microscopic adjustment to her scope. Through the glass, she could see Khalid Rahman moving between buildings in the compound below. High-value target, responsible for an attack 3 weeks ago that killed 22 Marines. Young men who'd never see home again because Rahman decided their death served his cause. The math was simple. 1 trigger pull, 1 life taken. 22 families who might sleep easier. Range, she whispered. 1,850 yards, MacLeod replied. Crosswind, heat shimmer, target moving. I've seen easier shots in my dreams. Maggie's finger rested beside the trigger guard of her custom Accuracy International rifle. Not on it, never on it until the moment arrived. Her mother's voice echoed in memory words from 28 years ago, when a 6-year-old girl watched her fighter pilot mother prepare for deployment. Do what's right, Maggie, not what's easy. Commander Evelyn Thorne had said that standing in their kitchen in Virginia Beach the morning before she deployed to Desert Storm. 3 weeks later, an Iraqi SAM missile found her F-14 over the desert. The official report said equipment malfunction. The missile warning system failed. Her mother never saw it coming. Maggie exhaled slowly, pushing the memory down into the locked box where it lived alongside all the other ghosts. Focus on the present. Focus on the shot. Focus on bringing these boys home alive. Rahman appeared in a doorway. 2 seconds of exposure. Maybe 3. Maggie's breathing slowed. Her heartbeat seemed to pause. The rifle became an extension of her body, her intent, her purpose. The crosshairs settled on center mass. Wind compensation. Bullet drop at 1,800 yards. Temperature, humidity, the rotation of the earth itself. All of it calculated in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke once. Through the scope, she watched Rahman's body snap backward. Center mass, cardiac area. He was dead before his brain registered the impact. Confirmed kill, MacLeod said quietly. Time to leave, lass. You just made a lot of people very unhappy. Maggie was already breaking down her position movements, economical and practiced. 22 hours lying still. 30 seconds to pack and move. The mathematics of staying alive in a war zone. Her radio crackled. Reaper 6, this is Alpha 6. Immediate extraction. RTB, acknowledge. She recognized General Victor Brennan's voice. Cold. Clipped. The kind of voice that expected instant obedience. Copy Alpha 6, Maggie replied. Reaper 6 RTB. MacLeod shot her a look as they moved toward the extraction point. That's the 6th time he's pulled us early in 3 months. I noticed. You notice a lot of things, Captain. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Maggie touched the dog tags hanging beneath her uniform. Her mother's tags worn smooth by 28 years of grief and determination. My job, Sergeant, same as always. But something in her gut twisted. An instinct honed by 6 years of combat. Something was wrong. The command center at FOB Sentinel hummed with controlled chaos. Officers moved between workstations coordinating operations across 3 provinces. Wall-mounted screens displayed drone feeds, intelligence reports, troop movements. The machinery of war grinding forward 1 mission at a time. General Victor Brennan stood at the central briefing table studying a topographic map. At 62, he looked exactly like Central Casting's vision of a 3-star general. Square jaw, steel gray hair, chest full of ribbons. A man who'd spent 4 decades in uniform rising through ranks on a combination of political connections and carefully cultivated reputation. Maggie entered the command center, her rifle case over one shoulder, McLeod behind her. The cut on her forehead from the scope's recoil had stopped bleeding, but she could feel the ache settling in. "Captain Thorne," Brennan said without looking up, "your sit rep better justify pulling you off surveillance." "Target eliminated, sir. Khalid Rahman, confirmed kill at 1,850 yards. Range confirmed," McLeod added. "Crosswind conditions, moving target. It was a damn fine shot." Brennan finally looked up. His eyes moved over Maggie with the kind of dismissive assessment that made her jaw clench. She'd seen that look before, on instructors who assumed she'd wash out, on officers who thought her assignment was political correctness, on men who couldn't reconcile her size with her capability. "McLeod made the calculations," Brennan said. "You pulled the trigger. Let's not confuse the two." The room went quiet. Junior officers suddenly found their screens fascinating. Maggie kept her voice level. "Sir, with respect, I made the calculations. Sergeant McLeod spotted. That's how sniper teams work." Brennan's expression hardened. He moved around the briefing table, stopping directly in front of her. The height difference was pronounced. He towered over her by nearly a foot. Intimidation through physical presence. Classic dominance behavior. "Captain Thorne," he said slowly, "are you correcting a 3-star general?" "No, sir, I'm clarifying operational procedure." "Operational procedure." Brennan's laugh had no humor in it. He turned to address the room. "Let me clarify something for everyone here. Combat effectiveness isn't about checking diversity boxes. It's about capability, physical capability, mental fortitude. The kind of strength that doesn't come in a 100-pound package playing dress-up in a uniform." The words landed like slaps. Maggie felt heat rising in her chest, but forced her expression to remain neutral. "Show nothing. Give him nothing." "Sir," Colonel Rebecca Hartwell interjected from across the room. The 57-year-old intelligence officer moved forward, her voice carrying command authority. "Captain Thorne just eliminated an HVT responsible for 22 American deaths. Perhaps we could focus on—" Brennan turned sharply, and in doing so, his shoulder caught Maggie with deliberate force. She stumbled backward into an equipment rack, the metal edge catching her forehead exactly where the scope had already cut. Pain flared. Blood began trickling down her temple. "Watch where you stand, girl," Brennan said, his voice carrying across the command center. "Combat zones aren't for the weak. Maybe stick to positions where you won't get in the way of real soldiers doing real work." The room froze. This wasn't an accident. Everyone knew it. Maggie straightened slowly, touching her forehead. Her fingers came away red. She looked at the blood, then at Brennan. Their eyes locked. In that moment, she saw something behind his contempt, something calculating. He wanted this reaction, wanted her to respond, to lash out, to prove his point about emotional instability and unsuitability. So she gave him nothing. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I'll be more careful." Brennan's jaw tightened. He'd expected anger, defense, emotion. Her controlled response threw off his script. "Dismissed, Captain," he snapped. "Get that cut looked at. Wouldn't want you bleeding on the taxpayers' equipment." Maggie saluted, turned, and walked out of the command center. McLeod followed, but not before shooting Brennan a look that could melt steel. In the corridor outside, Maggie stopped, leaning against the concrete wall. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From rage she'd spent 6 years learning to contain. "That son of a—" McLeod started. "Don't," Maggie cut him off. "Not here." He deliberately struck a fellow officer. "That's assault. I witnessed it. So did 20 others. It'll be classified as an accident. You know it. I know it." She wiped blood from her forehead. "This isn't about one moment, Sergeant. This is about a pattern." McLeod studied her face. "You're thinking tactically." "I'm always thinking tactically." Maggie pushed off the wall. "How many missions has Brennan aborted for us in the last 3 months?" 6, all at critical moments. "How many of those targets did other teams engage afterward?" McLeod's expression darkened. "None. The targets disappeared before follow-up operations could be coordinated." "Interesting pattern." Maggie started walking toward the medical station. "Very interesting pattern for a general who's supposed to be coordinating these operations." What are you saying, Captain? Maggie stopped, turning to face her spotter. Duncan MacLeod had served with her mother in the Gulf War. He'd been at Evelyn Thorne's memorial service, watching a 6-year-old girl accept a folded flag. He'd mentored Maggie through sniper school when instructors tried to wash her out. He'd saved her life in Kandahar, and she'd returned the favor in Helmand. Trust was earned in blood and time. She trusted MacLeod with her life. But what she was thinking, what she was beginning to suspect, could end careers or save lives. "I'm saying," she replied carefully, "that I want to understand why a 3-star general cares so much about one captain that he'll humiliate her in front of her peers. What's he afraid I'll see that I haven't seen yet?" MacLeod's weathered face showed understanding. "You want me to start asking questions? I want you to keep your eyes open. Listen to what people aren't saying. Notice what doesn't add up. And you—" Maggie touched her mother's dog tags through her uniform. "I'm going to be very, very careful. Because men like Brennan don't waste energy on threats they don't take seriously." 20 hours later, Maggie lay in the same observation position, watching the same compound. Different target. Same mission profile. Hamza Nazari's weapons cache intelligence indicating a major meeting of cell leaders tonight. 22 hours of surveillance. Infrared confirms 16 heat signatures in the target building. Perfect opportunity for a decapitation strike. Her radio crackled at 0300 hours. Reaper 6 Alpha 6, immediate extraction. Mission abort, acknowledge. Maggie's finger paused on the transmit button. Through her scope, she could see movement in the compound. Leaders arriving. The window is now. Alpha 6 Reaper 6, request clarification. Target package is active. High-value convergence in progress. Immediate extraction, Captain. That's an order. Acknowledge. The steel in Brennan's voice left no room for debate. Copy Alpha 6. Reaper 6 extracting. MacLeod was already packing equipment, his movements angry and sharp. That's 6 missions, Maggie. 6 times he's pulled us at the critical moment. I know. This isn't tactics. This is sabotage. I know that too. They moved through the darkness toward the extraction point, taking a Wadi system that provided cover from observation. MacLeod's radio suddenly buzzed with an encrypted message. He checked it, his expression hardening. Colonel Hartwell wants to see you immediately, private channel. Colonel Rebecca Hartwell's quarters were Spartan a cot, a footlocker, a small desk covered in classified documents. She looked up as Maggie entered her face grave. Close the door, Maggie complied. Ma'am, Hartwell stood moving to a secure laptop. How well do you know your service record, Captain? Pretty well, ma'am. I've lived it. Then explain this. Hartwell turned the screen. It showed Maggie's personnel file, specifically her promotion recommendations. 3 of them, all submitted by different commanding officers over the past 18 months, all recommending her for promotion to major, all denied. The denial reasons, Hartwell continued, are identical in all 3 cases. Insufficient physical capability for 04 rank, recommend retention at current grade. Maggie felt ice forming in her stomach. Who signed the denials? General Victor Brennan. In his capacity as Theater Operations Commander, he has approval authority over all promotions for Special Operations personnel. That's unusual, isn't it, for a 3-star to personally review captain promotions? It's unheard of, Hartwell replied, unless someone specifically brings those files to his attention. Which means Brennan is actively tracking your career. The question is why? Maggie thought about the physical confrontation, the deliberate pattern of mission aborts, the personal contempt that went beyond typical sexism. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always, Captain. This is off the record. I think General Brennan sees me as a threat, not to his authority, to something else, something I don't understand yet. Hartwell nodded slowly. I've been monitoring communications patterns. 3 days ago, Brennan arrived with a new intelligence officer. Major Nikolai Volkov, Russian-American background, impeccable credentials on paper. But his service record doesn't match standard verification protocols. It's too perfect, too clean, like someone built it from scratch rather than accumulated it over a career. Maggie's tactical mind began connecting dots. What's Volkov's role in current operations? Intelligence coordination, specifically target package development and mission planning. Hartwell pulled up another screen. Including tonight's operation, the one you just got pulled from. The one that's happening in Maggie checked her watch, 6 hour with Lieutenant Bishop's team. Lieutenant Garrett Bishop, Hartwell confirmed, 26 years old, 7 months in country, son of Senator Richard Bishop. And as of this evening's operations brief, he's leading a direct action raid on the compound you've been surveilling. Maggie stared at the operational plan displayed on screen. The insertion point, the approach route, the extraction plan, all of it wrong, catastrophically wrong. Ma'am, that LZ is exposed to high ground on 3 sides. Any competent enemy would position snipers there. I noticed. And the extraction route goes through a valley we've identified as a probable IED location. We've been avoiding it for months. I noticed that too. Their eyes met. The implications hung in the air between them, too dangerous to voice directly. Captain Thorne, Hartwell said carefully, what do you know about your mother's death? The question hit like a physical blow. Ma'am, Commander Evelyn Thorne, Desert Storm, shot down January 1991, official cause equipment malfunction, specifically missile warning system failure. That's what the report said. I've read it 100 times. Hartwell opened a file drawer, retrieving a folder marked with classification stamps. This is a classified addendum to that report. It required my O6 clearance to access. I think you should read it. Maggie took the folder with trembling hands. Inside, she found technical analysis photographs, witness statements, and on the third page, a paragraph that made her blood run cold. Post-incident examination of recovered wreckage revealed systematic failure in the AN/ALR-67 missile warning receiver. Parts analysis indicates substandard components inconsistent with original manufacturer specifications. Investigation traced parts to secondary supplier Brennan Systems Limited, a defense subcontractor owned by the family of then-Colonel Victor Brennan. Financial records show Brennan received $340,000 in consultation fees from BSL in fiscal year 1990. The words blurred. Maggie read them again, then again. Investigation was closed by Pentagon legal counsel, Hartwell continued quietly. Classified as supplier quality control issue. No criminal charges filed. No disciplinary action taken. Victor Brennan continued his career without interruption. Maggie looked up, her voice barely a whisper. He killed my mother. The defective parts killed your mother. But yes, Brennan profited from supplying those parts. And when investigation threatened, he had connections enough to bury it. 28 years. 28 years of believing her mother's death was bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. 28 years of grief and anger with no target, no focus, no justice. Now she knew. Why are you showing me this, ma'am? Hartwell's expression was granite. Because I've been monitoring encrypted communications between Major Volkov and an unknown source. The traffic patterns match KGB operational protocols from the Cold War. And because tonight's mission profile has the same characteristics as 3 previous operations under Brennan's command that resulted in catastrophic casualties. You think he's doing it again, deliberately setting up soldiers to die. I think, Hartwell said carefully, that someone needs to conduct unofficial reconnaissance ahead of Lieutenant Bishop's insertion point. Someone skilled enough to identify threats. Someone expendable enough that if they're caught, it won't compromise official operations. You're ordering me to go outside the wire, alone, without authorization. I'm giving you a satellite phone with encrypted channels. Hartwell handed over a small device. I'm suggesting that good intelligence officers conduct thorough reconnaissance. What you do with that suggestion is your decision, Captain. Maggie looked at the phone, then at the file documenting her mother's murder, then at the operational plan that would send 16 soldiers into what looked increasingly like an ambush. If I'm wrong, she said slowly, I'm ending my career, probably facing court-martial for disobeying direct orders. Yes. And if I'm right, if you're right, you might save 16 lives and expose whatever Brennan is really doing here. Hartwell paused. Your mother was my friend Maggie. We went through flight school together. She was the best pilot I ever knew. What happened to her wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just about money. There was something larger at work. You think Brennan was testing something? Using my mother as a test case. I think proving that equipment failures could be hidden as combat losses opened a door, a very profitable door for the right people. Hartwell closed the laptop. And I think that door is still open, still being used, still killing our people. Maggie stood tucking the satellite phone into her cargo pocket. What about McLeod? He's already been briefed. He wanted to go with you. I ordered him to stay here. If this goes wrong, someone needs to tell the truth about what happened. And you, ma'am, if Brennan finds out you sent me, let me worry about my career, Captain. You worry about staying alive and getting the intelligence we need. Hartwell extended her hand. Your mother would be proud of you. Not because you're a good soldier, because you're a good person who refuses to let evil hide in shadows. Maggie shook her hand, feeling the weight of 28 years settling onto her shoulders. When do I move? Bishop's team inserts at 01:45 hours. You need to be in position by Yo 100. That gives you, Hartwell checked her watch, 8 hours to prep, move, and establish observation. Then I better get started. Maggie turned toward the door, then stopped. Ma'am, thank you for trusting me with the truth about my mother. The truth isn't a gift, Captain. It's a weapon. Use it carefully. Maggie's quarters were a small room with a cot, a footlocker, and ghosts. She sat on the cot, her mother's dog tags in her hands, the classified file spread beside her. Commander Evelyn Thorne smiled up from a photograph. Flight suit helmet, underarms, standing beside her F-14. The pride in that smile was unmistakable. First female fighter pilot in her squadron. Breaking barriers, proving capabilities, opening doors for women who'd follow. Shot down by equipment that a man sold knowing it was defective. Killed for profit margins and test data. Maggie's hands shook with rage. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Do what's right, Maggie, not what's easy. Right would be reporting through channels. Following procedure. Trusting the system to deliver justice. Easy would be putting a bullet in Brennan's head and accepting the consequences. Neither option would save the 16 men inserting in 7 hours. Maggie began assembling her kit. Lightweight plate carrier. Suppressed Glock 19. Extra magazines, night vision. First aid. Water. And from the bottom of her footlocker, wrapped in cloth, her mother's knife. A KA-bar fighting knife carried by Evelyn Thorne through flight school, through deployments, through a career of breaking barriers. The blade was worn, but sharp. The handle fit Maggie's hand like it had been waiting 28 years for this moment. She strapped it to her boot sheath. A knock at the door. McLeod entered without waiting for invitation. The old sergeant looked at the assembled gear, at the knife, at Maggie's face. You're going after him, he said quietly. I'm conducting reconnaissance. Don't lie to an old soldier, lass. I know that look. I saw it on your mother's face in '91, right before she volunteered for the most dangerous missions. He sat heavily on the footlocker. Evelyn was my pilot in the Gulf. Did you know that? You never told me. Never seemed the right time. But I was in her backseater crew rotation. Flew 6 missions with her. She was fearless. Absolutely fearless. But not reckless. She calculated every risk, understood every danger, and only took chances when lives depended on it. McLeod's voice roughened with emotion. When her bird went down, they told us equipment failure. I accepted it because what else could I do? But I always wondered. Her warning systems had been acting strange the week before. She reported it. Maintenance said everything checked out. He looked at Maggie with eyes that had seen too much war, too much death, too many lies. Tell me the truth, Captain. Was her death preventable? Maggie handed him the classified file. McLeod read in silence, his weathered face hardened with each paragraph. When he finished, he carefully closed the folder and set it aside. Brennan, he said. The name came out like a curse. Brennan, Maggie confirmed, and now he's doing it again. I think so. I don't know why. I don't know the full scope, but the pattern's there. Operations that fail, equipment that malfunctions, soldiers who die, and someone profits. McLeod stood, moving to the small window that overlooked the base perimeter. In '91, after Evelyn died, Brennan got promoted, made full colonel 6 months later. I thought it was odd timing, but promotions are political. Always have been. Following tragedy with advancement. Classic pattern. Make yourself the solution to a problem you created. So what's your play, Captain? And don't tell me you're just doing reconnaissance. I trained you better than that. Maggie checked her weapons, her movements automatic from years of practice. I'm going to find out what Bishop's walking into. If it's legitimate, I observe and report. If it's an ambush, I call it in and try to abort the mission. And if Brennan's there, if this is bigger than we think. Maggie looked at her mother's knife, then at McLeod. Then I do what's right, not what's easy. McLeod nodded slowly. Your mother said that exact phrase before her last mission. I told her to be careful. She said careful wasn't the same as safe. He pulled a small device from his pocket. Encrypted beacon, military grade. If you trigger it, I come running with whatever force I can muster. Hartwell's already cleared me to mobilize 2nd Battalion if necessary. That'll end your career too. I'm 54 years old with 30 years in. My career is long enough, but I only get one chance to make right what went wrong in '91. He pressed the beacon into her hand. Don't die for pride, lass. Your mother did that. Don't make me bury 2 Thorn women. Maggie hugged him. The old sergeant stiffened with a surprise, then returned it, his arms strong despite his age. Bring those boys home, he whispered, and come back yourself. That's an order from your spotter. Yes, Sergeant. After he left, Maggie finished her preparations. She changed into darkened utilities. No American flag patch, no name tape, no rank insignia. If captured, plausible deniability. She loaded her weapons, checked her gear, and strapped her mother's knife to her boot. At 2100 hours, she slipped out of her quarters. The base perimeter was quiet guard rotation, just changed 30-second gap in observation as posts were relieved. She'd timed it perfectly. A battered pickup truck waited at a prearranged spot beyond the wire. The driver was a local Pashtun man face weathered by sun and hardship. Hartwell had arranged the contact. No words were exchanged. Payment had been made through channels that couldn't be traced. They drove through darkness headlights off using routes that avoided checkpoints. 11 kilometers of rough terrain, wadi beds, and ancient caravan trails. The driver knew the land like Maggie knew her rifle intimate, knowledge earned through generations. 5 kilometers from the target village, the truck stopped. The driver pointed toward a ridge line barely visible against the stars. Maggie nodded her understanding. She shouldered her pack and moved into the night. The terrain was brutal, loose rocks, steep inclines, thorny vegetation that tore at exposed skin. She moved carefully, methodically, using every piece of cover. No night vision yet. Let her eyes adapt naturally to darkness. Technology could fail. Training never did. 2 hours of movement brought her to an overwatch position above the target village. Soviet-era compound ruins abandoned decades ago when the Russians retreated. Intelligence said Hamza Nazari used it as a weapons cache. Maggie found a position on a rooftop with clear sightlines. She activated her night vision, scanning the compound below, and went absolutely still. Through the green glow of her PVS-31 goggles, she counted heat signatures. 60-plus insurgents, heavy weapons emplacements, Russian Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft guns positioned on rooftops, mortar systems in courtyard positions. All of it aimed at a single point in the valley below. The exact coordinates designated as Lieutenant Bishop's landing zone. This wasn't a weapons cache. This was a kill zone. Maggie's hands shook as she raised her rifle scope for detailed observation. Through the magnification, she could see weapon systems being adjusted, tested, prepared. Professional movements, military precision. These weren't random insurgents. This was an organized ambush using Soviet-era tactics and equipment. Her scope swept the compound, documenting positions, counting personnel, noting equipment types. 16 heat signatures in the central building, the supposed meeting of cell leaders. She zoomed in on the building's entrance, and her breath stopped. A figure stood in the doorway, illuminated briefly by interior light. Western clothing, body shape and movement wrong for local insurgents. Maggie's scope had a camera attachment. She triggered it, capturing high-resolution images even as her mind rejected what she was seeing. The figure turned face, briefly visible in profile. General Victor Brennan, the man responsible for her mother's death, stood in an enemy compound, consulting with insurgent leaders 6 hours before 16 American soldiers were scheduled to land in a prepared kill zone. Maggie's finger moved to the satellite phone. She needed to report this, needed to abort Bishop's mission, needed to. American women should not play at war. The voice came from behind her, accented English, cold, professional. Maggie started to turn, reaching for her sidearm. Pain exploded across the back of her head. Darkness swallowed everything. Consciousness returned in fragments. pain first sharp and throbbing at the base of her skull. Then awareness of restraint, flex cuffs cutting into her wrists, bound behind her back. The acrid smell of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies. Rough fabric pressed against her face. A hood. Maggie forced herself to remain still to catalog information before revealing she was awake. Voices speaking in Pashto nearby. The creak of floorboards beneath boots. Temperature cooler than outside, suggesting interior space with thick walls. Stone construction, probably the central building she'd observed. Her weapons were gone. Sidearm rifle knife. They'd searched her thoroughly, but not perfectly. She could still feel the satellite phone pressed against her lower back, missed in the cursory pat-down. Small victories. The hood was yanked off without warning. Harsh LED lantern light stabbed her eyes. She blinked, forcing her vision to adjust, refusing to show weakness. 4 men stood around her. 3 carried AK-47s with the casual familiarity of lifelong fighters. The 4th was different. Older, maybe 48, wearing Western outdoor clothing that cost more than most Afghans made in a year. His face showed intelligence and something worse, education applied to violence. Captain Magdalene Thorne, he said in lightly accented English. Oxford education, maybe Cambridge. Daughter of Commander Evelyn Thorne, United States Navy. 43 confirmed kills. The American's little girl sniper who thinks she is warrior. Maggie said nothing. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing else. Not yet. The man smiled without warmth. I am Karim Rashid. Perhaps you have heard of me. Your intelligence services have file, I think. Soviet training in 1980s. Before your country decided Afghanistan was not worth the effort. She had heard of him. High-value target connected to Russian intelligence. Sophisticated operator who'd survived 4 decades of war by being smarter and more brutal than his enemies. Rashid crouched in front of her, studying her face with clinical interest. You were taking photographs of our compound. Very professional, very thorough. This tells me Colonel Hartwell sent you. The sentimental woman who cannot accept that war requires acceptable losses. He knew Hartwell, knew the command structure. This wasn't just enemy intelligence, this was insider knowledge. Your general, Rashid continued standing and moving to a laptop on a makeshift table, has been very cooperative partner. Very profitable arrangement for all parties. Tonight, 16 American soldiers arrive in Valley Below. They land in kill zone. Our weapons destroy their helicopters. Soldiers dot or are captured. Tragedy of war, yes. Maggie's jaw clenched. 16 men walking into death. Bishop, barely old enough to drink legally, leading them because a senator's son needed combat experience for his political future, and Brennan had arranged it all. We received territory, weapons, and international attention, Rashid said, typing on the laptop. Your general receives $5.2 million American dollars, deposited in accounts that cannot be traced. Everyone profits except the soldiers. But soldiers are made for dying, as this is their purpose. He turned the laptop screen toward her. It showed a tactical display with real-time GPS markers. Bishop's team moving toward their staging area. 12 minutes to wheels up. You will watch, Rashid said softly. You will see what happens when little girls play soldier in men's wars. And then you will tell us everything about your base defenses. Every weak point, every patrol route, every system. Or we will hurt you in ways that make dying seem merciful. One of the guards grabbed Maggie's arm, hauling her to her feet. Pain shot through her shoulders as damaged muscles protested. They dragged her toward a doorway leading deeper into the compound. The next room was larger. Maps covered one wall. Communication equipment hummed in the corner. And standing at a table covered with topographic charts marking positions with a red pen was General Victor Brennan. He looked up as she was shoved into the room. No surprise registered on his face, just cold satisfaction. Captain Thorne, he said, setting down the pen. Colonel Hartwell is predictable in her sentimentality. I knew she would send someone. I knew it would be you. Maggie stared at the man who'd killed her mother, who was about to kill 16 more soldiers, who wore a uniform she'd spent her life honoring while betraying everything it represented. You're selling out your own men, she said, her voice rough from dehydration and the blow to her head. Selling out. Brennan laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Such dramatic language. I'm conducting strategic business, creating opportunities, managing resources. This is how real warfare works, Captain. Not the Hollywood version they taught you at West Point. I went to Virginia Tech. ROTC. Yes, following your mother's path. How touching. Brennan moved closer, his eyes cold as January. Evelyn Thorne, the Great Barrier Breaker, first female fighter pilot in her squadron. So brave, so dedicated, so utterly convinced that courage and skill mattered more than understanding the real game. Maggie's hands worked against the flex cuffs behind her back. Tight, but not impossible. Colonel Hartwell had taught her techniques. Advanced sear training, dislocate the thumb compress, the handwork, the restraint. Painful, effective. Your mother, Brennan continued, circling her slowly, was a test case. We needed to know if equipment failures could be attributed to combat losses without triggering investigation. If families could be satisfied with honorable death narratives instead of demanding accountability. The casual admission hit like a physical blow. Not accidental, not even negligent, deliberate murder disguised as warfare. She flew with defective warning systems, Maggie said, keeping her voice steady while her hands worked the restraints. Systems your company supplied. Brennan Systems Limited supplied components that met the minimum specifications required by contract. If those specifications were insufficient for actual combat conditions, that's not our liability. That's the Pentagon's purchasing failure. His smile was cruel. We made $340,000 on that contract. Your mother's death proved the model worked. No investigation, no accountability. Just a grieving family and a flag-folded ceremony. Maggie felt the flex cuff shifting slightly. Keep him talking. Keep him focused on his own brilliance while she worked. So you've been doing this for 28 years. How many soldiers have died for your profit? 73 confirmed, Brennan said with the tone of someone discussing quarterly earnings. Though the real number is probably higher, equipment failures are wonderfully deniable. Soldiers die in war. Equipment malfunctions under stress. These are acceptable explanations that satisfied families want to believe. He moved to the laptop, checking the tactical display. Tonight adds 16 more, enough to justify emergency defense appropriation. $940 million to upgrade equipment across 3 theaters. Contracts that will be filled by companies I have strategic relationships with. Companies that understand profit margins are more important than performance specifications. Rashid entered the room speaking in rapid Pashto. Brennan nodded, responding in the same language with surprising fluency. Years of operating in theater, making deals, building relationships with enemies who served his interests better than allies who might question his methods. Lieutenant Bishop's team is airborne, Brennan said, switching back to English. 15 minutes to insertion. You have a front row seat to understanding how the world actually works. The flex cuff suddenly gave way. Maggie's thumb screamed with pain as it popped from its socket, a technique that worked but cost. She kept her hands behind her back, showing no sign of the breakthrough. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. The hostages, Rashid said, gesturing to an adjacent room. Perhaps the captain would like to meet her fellow captives and Americans, who also did not understand their place. 2 guards grabbed Maggie, hauling her through a doorway into a smaller room. 3 people sat against the wall, hands bound, looking exhausted and terrified. A woman in her 30s, blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her eyes showed intelligence fighting through fear. Sienna Gallagher, Maggie recognized from the missing persons bulletin. Investigative journalist who'd been tracking defense contractor corruption. A man in his 40s, dark hair graying at the temples, wearing tattered Doctors Without Borders identification. Dr. Timothy Bradford, taken from a medical convoy 3 weeks ago. And a woman close to 40, athletic, build, short brown hair, wearing aid worker clothing, but carrying herself like someone with military training. She made brief eye contact with Maggie, a flash of recognition and calculation. The guards shoved Maggie down beside them. The athletic woman shifted slightly closer. Emma Whitfield, she whispered, barely audible. Save the Children Foundation. Maggie recognized tradecraft. Aid worker was cover. This woman was something else. Maggie Thorne, she whispered back. Army. You. Later, broken ribs, dislocated shoulder. Can't fight, but I have something they want. The slightest head movement toward her left boot. Blue tape. Before Maggie could respond, Rashid entered with Brennan. The general looked at the 4 captives with the expression of someone reviewing livestock. Ms. Gallagher, he said, addressing the journalist, still pursuing your investigation into defense contractor fraud. I admire persistence, even when it's foolish. You're murdering American soldiers for money, Sienna said, her voice shaking but defiant. When this gets out, when what gets out, Brennan interrupted. You're a missing journalist in a war zone, tragic casualty of Taliban aggression. Your notes and recordings were lost when the convoy was attacked. These things happen. He turned to Bradford. Doctor, your organization will receive your body with a letter praising your humanitarian sacrifice. They'll hold a memorial, perhaps name a clinic after you. Very touching. You're a monster, Bradford said quietly. I'm a businessman operating in a market you don't understand. Moral judgments are luxuries for people who don't grasp how the world actually functions. Brennan checked his watch. 10 minutes to insertion. Captain Thorne, I want you to understand something. Your mother's death wasn't personal. Neither is tonight. This is simply business at the scale that matters. He moved closer, crouching in front of Maggie. Evelyn thought she could change the military through excellence, prove that gender didn't matter, only capability. She was wrong. What matters is understanding the system, using the system, profiting from the system. She died because she believed in honor and duty, concepts for children and fools. Maggie held his gaze, her dislocated thumb, throbbing her mother's knife somewhere in this compound, her hands secretly free behind her back. My mother, she said softly, believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, in standing against evil even when it wore a uniform, in doing what's right instead of what's profitable. Yes, Brennan said, standing, and she died for those beliefs, as you will, as anyone will who places idealism above reality. He turned to Rashid. Move the captain to the observation platform. Let her watch the helicopters burn. Then we'll discuss her cooperation regarding base defenses. Two guards grabbed Maggie again, hauling her toward a stairway. She caught the other woman's eye, Emma, or whatever her real name was. The woman's expression said, wait, not yet, trust the timing. The observation platform was a rooftop position with clear sight lines to the valley below. They bound Maggie to a support post with additional flex cuffs, arms wrapped around the concrete. Professional restraint. They'd learned from her earlier escape attempt. Below, she could see the kill zone clearly, weapon systems positioned on three sides, heavy machine guns, RPGs, the Russian anti-aircraft guns, mortars pre-sighted for the landing zone coordinates, 60-plus fighters in position, waiting. Bishop's helicopters would land in a slaughter. The satellite phone pressed against her back, still undiscovered. If she could trigger it, McLeod would mobilize 2nd Battalion. But they were 15 minutes out at best. Bishop's team would be on the ground in 8 minutes. 8 minutes to prevent a massacre with her hands bound to a post and 60 enemy fighters between her and communication equipment. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Sometimes the right thing is impossible. That's when you do it anyway. Rashid appeared on the rooftop, satellite phone in hand. Not hers, his own encrypted device. He spoke in Russian, coordinating timing. Professional operation, multiple layers of planning. This wasn't improvised ambush. This was calculated murder with international coordination. He ended the call and turned to Maggie. Your helicopters are 3 minutes out. They will land and we will destroy them. 15, maybe 16 Americans will die in the first 30 seconds. Some will survive the crash. We will capture them. Eventually, after appropriate time, their bodies will be returned. Another tragedy of war. Why are you doing this? Maggie asked. Keep him talking. Keep gathering information. Money, Rashid said simply. Your General Brennan pays well. The Russians pay better. Everyone profits from American military failure. Your country spent 20 years in Afghanistan learning nothing. We are simply accelerating your education. Below in the compound, Maggie could see movement. Brennan emerging from the central building with Major Volkov, the mysterious intelligence officer. They moved to a vehicle, a Toyota Land Cruiser, engine running. Escape route planned. They'd watch the massacre from a distance, then disappear before response forces arrived. 2 minutes. Maggie worked against the restraints, but these were different. Tighter. Multiple attachment points. Rashid had learned. In the valley, she could hear the distant thump of helicopter rotors. UH-60 Blackhawks, distinctive sound getting louder. Bishop's team inbound, unaware they were flying into hell. Rashid lifted binoculars tracking the sound. Beautiful night for dying, yes. 1 minute. The helicopters appeared as dark shapes against darker sky. Two aircraft running lights off flying nap of Earth to avoid detection. Professional piloting. Good troops doing their jobs, trusting intelligence, trusting leadership, trusting that the system protected them. All of it lies. 30 seconds. The lead helicopter began its landing approach, flaring nose up to slow descent. The second bird offset right covering. Standard insertion protocol. Rashid raised his radio. Weapons free in 5, 4, 3. Maggie's hands worked desperately against restraints. The flex cuffs cut deep blood, making them slippery. Not enough time. She wasn't going to take it. 2, 1, and the satellite phone against her back suddenly vibrated, not hers, the one McLeod had given her. The emergency beacon he'd activated, which meant McLeod knew she was in trouble, which meant help was coming, but not in time for Bishop's team. Rashid finished the countdown. Fire. The night exploded, but not from Rashid's ambush, from the helicopters themselves. Both UH-60s suddenly broke off their approach, banking hard right, climbing fast, taking evasive maneuvers. Flares burst from their defensive systems, creating brilliant cascades of light. The anti-aircraft guns opened up tracers arcing through darkness. But the helicopters were already moving, already out of the kill zone, already executing emergency extraction. Rashid stared in confusion, screaming into his radio. Fire, fire, they are escaping! But the helicopters were gone, vanishing into the night with the speed of pilots who knew they'd almost died. Maggie understood before Rashid did. Someone had warned them. Someone had gotten the abort code through. But who, below chaos, erupted in the compound? Fighters running to vehicles, commanders shouting orders. The ambush had failed. The Americans knew. Response forces would come hard and fast. Brennan and Volkov's Land Cruiser roared to life, tearing out of the compound toward escape routes. Rashid spun on Maggie, his face twisted with rage. You signaled them. How? He grabbed her throat, squeezing. Maggie gasped, unable to breathe, unable to answer. She hadn't signaled anyone, but someone had. Someone had saved Bishop's team. A voice called from below. Urgent Pashto. Rashid released Maggie, responding angrily. American response forces inbound. They had minutes, maybe less. He drew a knife, moving toward Maggie. If I cannot have victory, I will have revenge. The blade pressed against her throat. Maggie felt cold metal on skin, felt the pressure increasing. This was it. Captured, bound, about to die on a rooftop in Afghanistan, just like her mother died in the sky over Iraq. Gunfire erupted from inside the compound. Not ambush weapons, different sound. M4 carbines, American weapons. Rashid hesitated, the knife pressure easing slightly. More gunfire, shouting in English. Return fire from insurgents. The cavalry had arrived early, but how the rooftop access door exploded open. Master Sergeant Duncan McLeod emerged, rifle up, night vision, down, moving like a man 30 years younger. Get away from her, he growled in a voice that had ordered men through 30 years of combat. Rashid spun, bringing his knife around. McLeod fired twice. Center mass, professional, efficient. Rashid collapsed, the knife clattering away. McLeod moved to Maggie, pulling a knife to cut her restraints. You have terrible timing, lass. I specifically ordered you not to get captured. I'm bad at following orders, Maggie gasped as the restraints fell away. How did you warn Bishop? Wasn't me, was the other captive, the one who isn't actually an aid worker. CIA officer Charlotte Blackwood emerged from the stairway, favoring her injured ribs, carrying an insurgent's radio. Triggered their abort sequence, made it look like their own command called off the ambush. Bought us maybe 5 minutes of confusion. You speak Russian? Maggie asked, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. Among other languages. CIA benefits package. Blackwood moved to Rashid's body, retrieving a small device from his pocket. Micro SD card with blue tape. Got what I came for. Brennan's entire conspiracy on encrypted recording. Financial transactions, communications with Russian intelligence, kill orders. Everything. Brennan and Volkov left, Maggie said. Land Cruiser heading north. Let them run, McLeod said. Colonel Hartwell has QRF blocking escape routes. They won't get far. The other hostages, Gallagher and Bradford, are secure. Second platoon is clearing the compound. We need to move before someone gets ideas about making last stands. Maggie retrieved her weapons from Rashid's belt, her Glock and her mother's knife. The blade felt right in her hand, on 28 years and half a world away from when Evelyn Thorne had carried it. They moved down the stairs, Blackwood covering rear despite her injuries. The compound was chaos, insurgents fleeing American forces, securing positions, the machinery of combat operating with practiced efficiency. Colonel Hartwell stood in the central building, coordinating over radio. She looked up as Maggie entered. Captain Thorne, glad you could join us. Glad to be invited, ma'am. Bishop's team. Safe. Diverted to alternate LZ. All personnel accounted for. Hartwell's expression hardened. We have a situation, however. Brennan and Volkov are running. They have a 15-minute head start and probably multiple escape routes planned. Then we hunt them down. Negative. You're injured, exhausted, and technically operating outside authorized parameters. This is now a command-level manhunt with air support, and an explosion shook the compound. Not close, but big. Everyone moved to the windows. In the distance, a fireball rose into the night sky, the distinctive signature of an anti-tank mine detonating under a vehicle. McLeod lowered his binoculars. Land cruiser heading north. Hit something in the road, no survivors. Maggie stared at the flames. Victor Brennan dead in a flash. Quick. Painless. Nothing like the 73 soldiers whose deaths he'd orchestrated for profit. Justice, she said quietly. Justice, Hartwell agreed. Not perfect, not satisfying, but final. Blackwood handed Hartwell the micro SD card. Everything you need. Recordings, financial data, Russian intelligence connections. Brennan was middle management for a network that spans 3 continents. How deep does this go? Deep enough to require CIA JAG and congressional investigation. This isn't one corrupt general. This is systematic compromise of defense procurement going back 3 decades. Maggie felt the weight settling. One battle won, one enemy dead. But the war, the real war against corruption that killed from inside the system, that was just beginning. The other hostages, she asked. Sienna Gallagher is already writing the story, McLeod said. Girls Got Spine. Insisted on interviewing you before medevac. And Bradford, treating casualties, ours and theirs, says it's what he does. Maggie looked around the compound. American soldiers providing security, medical aid, and professional competence. This was what her mother had believed in. Not the corruption, not the profit, not the betrayal. This people doing hard jobs in impossible places because someone had to stand against the darkness. Captain Thorne, Hartwell said formally, you are to report to Field Hospital for medical evaluation. That's an order you will follow. Yes, ma'am. As they moved toward the extraction point, McLeod walked beside Maggie. Your mother would be proud, lass. She'd be alive if the system worked. Aye, but because it failed her, you fixed it for the next 73 families. That's legacy. That's what soldiers' children do finish the mission. The helicopter ride back to base passed in exhaustion and pain. Maggie's thumb throbbed, her wrists bled, her head pounded. But 16 men were alive. 73 families would get truth. And Victor Brennan would never profit from another soldier's death. Small victories in a long war. As they approached FOB Sentinel, Maggie touched her mother's dog tags. Mission accomplished, Commander, she whispered. Not finished, but accomplished. The helicopter landed in a wash of rotor wash and settling dust. Tomorrow would bring debriefings, investigations, and consequences. Tonight they'd saved lives and exposed evil. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The med tent smelled of antiseptic and blood. Maggie sat on an examination table while a Navy corpsman cleaned the gash on her forehead and examined her dislocated thumb with professional detachment. This is going to hurt, he said, gripping her thumb. Everything hurts. He reset the joint with a sharp pop. White-hot pain lanced through her hand. Maggie breathed through it, refusing to cry out. The corpsman wrapped it in a stabilizing splint, then moved to her wrists where the flex cuffs had cut deep. You're lucky, he said, applying antibiotic ointment. Another hour and these would have gotten infected. Afghanistan doesn't forgive open wounds. I'll remember that for next time. There shouldn't be a next time, Captain. Whatever you did tonight, it wasn't standard operating procedure. Maggie met his eyes. Young kid, maybe 25, probably saw more trauma in 6 months here than most doctors saw in careers. Standard procedure doesn't cover every situation. No, ma'am, I suppose it doesn't. He finished bandaging. You're cleared for duty, but I'm recommending 48 hours rest. That head injury could be concussion. Noted. She found McLeod waiting outside smoking a cigarette despite regulations. He stubbed it out when she appeared. Gallagher wants to talk to you. Girl won't shut up until she does. The journalist sat in the intelligence tent typing furiously on a borrowed laptop despite the late hour. She looked up as Maggie entered, her expression shifting from focused intensity to something like awe. Captain Thorne, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I'm not sure I did agree, McLeod Volin told me. A brief smile. I've been investigating defense contractor fraud for 3 years, chasing rumors, following money trails, interviewing families who suspected their loved ones died from preventable equipment failures. Everyone said I was paranoid, that the system had safeguards, that generals don't betray their own men for profit. She paused. You just proved I wasn't crazy. I proved Victor Brennan was a traitor. The rest of the system, that's still an open question. The CIA officer gave me access to the recordings, with permission to publish after official investigation concludes. This is going to be the biggest military corruption scandal since Fat Leonard. Sienna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. But I need your perspective. Brennan killed your mother 28 years ago. Tonight you stopped him from killing 16 more. What does justice look like to you? Maggie sat down heavily. The question deserved consideration, not reflex answers. My mother died believing in something bigger than herself. Brennan died running away from consequences. That's not justice, that's just conclusion. What would justice be? Exposure, investigation, accountability for everyone in the network, not just one general. Making sure no other 6-year-old watches the news and learns her mother died because someone valued profit over the protection. Maggie looked at Sienna directly. Your story is the justice. Make people care. Make them demand change. Sienna nodded slowly, typing notes. CIA officer Blackwood said the conspiracy goes back 30 years. Multiple countries, dozens of officers, billions in fraudulent contracts. This is going to take years to unravel. Then you better pace yourself. After the interview, Maggie walked the perimeter of Phobie Sentinel. Dawn approached, painting the Afghan sky in shades of purple and gold. Beautiful landscape hiding ugly realities. That was Afghanistan, gorgeous mountains concealing mines, peaceful valleys hosting ambushes, ancient culture ground between modern powers playing empire. Colonel Hartwell found her watching the sunrise from the observation tower. Can't sleep, the older woman asked. Didn't try. Too much adrenaline still. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Finally, Hartwell spoke. There will be an investigation, multiple investigations. Army, CID, FBI, CIA, probably congressional committees. Your actions tonight, going outside the wire without authorization, conducting unsanctioned reconnaissance. Technically, those are violations. I know. However, Hartwell's voice carried the tone of someone who'd spent decades navigating military bureaucracy. Given that your unauthorized actions prevented the death of 16 American soldiers and exposed a multi-decade conspiracy that has killed dozens more, I suspect the investigations will be understanding. Meaning you'll probably get a medal instead of a court-martial. Politics is funny that way. Maggie turned to face her mentor. You risked your career sending me out there. 30 years of service. Why, bay? Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun break the horizon. Because Evelyn was my friend. Because I knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Because sometimes the system fails and individuals have to step outside it to make things right. She looked at Maggie. Your mother would have done the same thing. Actually, she tried. She reported those equipment malfunctions before her last flight. I was the one who received the report. I forwarded it up the chain. It disappeared. The admission hung between them. For 28 years, I've wondered if I could have done more, Hartwell continued. Pushed harder, made more noise, refused to let it be buried. Last night gave me a chance to make that right. Through you. That's a heavy burden to put on a captain. Yes, it was. I'm sorry for that. Hartwell pulled an envelope from her pocket. These are orders. You're to report to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany for comprehensive medical evaluation. From there, you'll return stateside for debriefing at the Pentagon. This isn't optional. Maggie took the envelope. When a transport leaves in 6 hours, pack your gear, say your goodbyes, and try to sleep on the flight. Anisha, what about McLeod, the team? They'll follow after completion of their rotation. You're going early because Washington wants you front and center for the investigation. Hero of the hour. The face they'll put on cameras to prove the system works. The system that let Brennan operate for 30 years. Yes, that system, which is exactly why they want you visible to prove it can still produce people like you. Hartwell extended her hand. Your mother was the best pilot I ever knew. You're the best soldier. Don't let the politics change that. They shook hands. Maggie saluted. Hartwell returned it with the crispness of an officer who still believed ceremony mattered. 6 hours later, Maggie boarded a C-17 headed for Germany. McLeod walked her to the aircraft carrying her rifle case and duffel. Keep your head down, lass. Washington is a different kind of battlefield. I'll manage. You will, because you're Evelyn's daughter. And because I trained you not to take shit from anyone regardless of rank. He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. Proud of you, kid, always have been. The flight to Germany took 14 hours with one refueling stop. Maggie slept fitfully, dreams mixing combat with memories, her mother's face blending with Brennan's, the sound of helicopter rotors becoming the scream of a dying F-14. She woke over the Atlantic disoriented and aching. Landstuhl was efficient and thorough. Doctors examined every injury, psychologists evaluated her mental state, and administrators processed paperwork with Germanic precision. 3 days of tests, interviews, and bureaucratic procedure. On the fourth day, she boarded another flight, this time to Washington, D.C. The Pentagon was exactly as imposing as she'd imagined. Five-sided fortress symbol of American military power, housing thousands of personnel who made decisions affecting millions of lives worldwide. Maggie had never been inside. Her career was operational, not political. A Navy lieutenant met her at the entrance, escorting her through security checkpoints and endless corridors. They stopped at a conference room on the third floor. General Westwood will see you shortly, Captain. Can I get you anything, coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. Alone in the conference room, Maggie studied the photographs on the walls. Historical moments. MacArthur accepting Japanese surrender. Eisenhower with paratroopers before D-Day. Powell presenting Gulf War plans to the UN. The visual history of American military power. And in one corner, a newer photograph. Women officers at a ceremony. She recognized her mother in the front row, Commander Evelyn Thorne, 26 years old, standing with the first class of female fighter pilots. The door opened. Lieutenant General Catherine Westwood entered, 4-star General Marine Corps, first woman to hold the position. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd broken every barrier and refused to apologize for it. Captain Thorne, at ease. Westwood sat gesturing for Maggie to do the same. I've reviewed your actions in Afghanistan. Impressive work. Reckless, unauthorized, and completely contrary to proper procedure. Also necessary, effective, and heroic. This puts me in an interesting position. Ma'am, the position of deciding whether to court-martial you or recommend you for the Medal of Honor. The lawyers want the former. The politicians want the latter. I want the truth about what happened. Maggie had prepared for this. 3 days at Landstuhl gave her time to construct her narrative, choose her words, decide what to reveal and what to protect. But sitting across from General Westwood, she decided on a different approach. Complete honesty, she told everything. The pattern of aborted missions, Brennan's physical assault in the command center, the classified report about her mother's death, Hartwell's investigation and unofficial orders, the infiltration, the capture, the conspiracy revealed, Blackwood's recordings, McLeod's rescue, Brennan's death, all of it. Westwood listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. When Maggie finished, the general was quiet for a long moment. Your mother and I went through flight school together, she finally said. Different services, same program. She was the best pilot in our class. Not the best female pilot, the best pilot, period. When she died, I attended the funeral. You probably don't remember. You were very young. I remember a lot of people in uniforms. The faces blur together. I was one of those faces. I promised myself then that if I ever had the power to make the system better, I would. To honor Evelyn and all the others lost to failures we could prevent. Westwood leaned forward. What Brennan did wasn't just criminal. It was betrayal of everything the uniform represents. Exposing that matters more than procedural violations. So no court-martial. Oh, there will be investigations, depositions, testimony. The system has to process what happened, but the end result? Westwood pulled a folder from her briefcase. The end result is that you'll receive the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism in preventing the death of 16 American soldiers and exposing a multi-decade conspiracy that resulted in at least 73 confirmed American combat deaths. Maggie stared at the citation, reading words that described her actions in language that made them sound noble rather than desperate. I don't deserve this, ma'am. No one who receives the Medal of Honor thinks they deserve it. That's what makes them worthy. Westwood closed the folder. The ceremony will be in 4 weeks. You'll spend that time at Walter Reed for final medical clearance, then debriefing with various agencies. CIA wants to discuss Blackwood's intelligence. FBI wants details about Brennan's financial network. Congressional committees want testimony about defense procurement oversight. Sounds exhausting. It will be. Consider it the price of being a hero. The real question is what comes after. After. After the medal, after the investigations, after you're no longer useful for press conferences. What do you want for your career, Captain? Maggie hadn't thought that far ahead. The last month was survival and mission focus. Future felt like an abstract concept. I want to keep people safe, she said slowly. That's what my mother did. That's what I do. There are many ways to keep people safe. Operational roles, training positions, command assignments. Westwood paused. Or something new. We're forming a joint special operations task force focused on counterintelligence and internal corruption, hunting the traitors before they kill our people. It needs a commander who understands the stakes personally. You're offering me a command, ma'am. I'm an O3 captain. You'll be an O4 major by the time the task force is operational, assuming you want it. Major, field grade officer, command of an entire task force. It was a career leap that normally took years, politics, and luck. Why me? Because you've proven you can see patterns others miss. Because you'll operate outside comfortable boundaries when necessary. Because you understand that sometimes the biggest threats wear our uniform and speak our language. Westwood stood. Think about it. You have 4 weeks. After the ceremony, give me your answer. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of medical appointments, legal depositions, and media training. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office wanted to control the narrative. Heroic female soldier exposes corruption system works, despite individual bad actors' trust restored in military oversight. Maggie hated every minute of the press preparation, but understood its necessity. Public pressure would force congressional action. Congressional action would fund investigations. Investigations would expose the full network. Sienna Gallagher's story broke 2 weeks before the ceremony. Front page of the New York Times, Washington Post, and every major outlet. The Brennan Conspiracy, 3 decades of military corruption. Names, dates, financial transactions, recorded conversations. Everything Blackwood's intelligence had captured, now public record. The response was immediate and furious. Secretary of Defense ordered comprehensive review. Senate Armed Services Committee announced hearings. FBI opened criminal investigation into 9 currently serving officers. Defense contractors' stock prices plummeted. And families of soldiers killed by equipment failures began demanding answers. Maggie received letters, dozens at first, then hundreds. Parents, spouses, children of soldiers who died in circumstances that never made sense. Equipment that failed, intelligence that proved wrong, operations that went catastrophically wrong for unexplained reasons. She read every letter, remembered every name. Each one was someone's mother, someone's father, someone's child. Each represented a family destroyed by greed masquerading as acceptable loss. McLeod arrived from Afghanistan 3 days before the ceremony, tanned and grizzled and completely out of place in Washington's political landscape. "How are you holding up, lass? I'm tired of wearing dress uniform and smiling for cameras." "Wait until the ceremony. You'll have to do both simultaneously." He handed her a package. This came through official channels, from Colonel Hartwell. Inside was a shadow box. Her mother's medals, ribbons, pilot wings, and dog tags professionally mounted and preserved. A note in Hartwell's handwriting, "Your mother wore these with honor. You've earned the right to display them with yours." Maggie traced her fingers over the dog tags she'd worn for 28 years. "Did you know about the equipment failures? I suspected something wasn't right. Your mother was too good a pilot to die from simple malfunction. But I didn't know the scope. Didn't know it was deliberate." McLeod sat heavily. "I'm sorry I didn't do more. You did plenty. You kept me alive, taught me to shoot, made sure I didn't wash out when instructors decided a woman couldn't be a sniper. That was just training, lass. What you did in Afghanistan, that was courage." The Medal of Honor ceremony took place in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, smaller than the White House East Room where presidential presentations occurred, but no less significant. Generals, admirals, politicians, and press packed the space. Maggie stood in dress uniform, her injuries mostly healed, her thumb still splinted. McLeod stood nearby in his own dress uniform, chest covered with 30 years of ribbons. Hartwell had flown in from Germany, now promoted to brigadier general. Sienna Gallagher covered the ceremony for the Times. Dr. Bradford attended as a special guest. CIA officer Charlotte Blackwood watched from the back, her real name and position still classified. Lieutenant General Westwood stepped to the podium. The Medal of Honor is America's highest military decoration, awarded for personal acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. Today we honor Captain Magdalene Thorne, whose actions in Afghanistan exemplify the finest traditions of military service. Westwood read the citation, clinical language describing the night's events, unauthorized reconnaissance exposure, of conspiracy prevention of ambush, rescue of hostages, words that couldn't capture the fear, the rage, the desperate calculations that kept 16 men alive. Captain Thorne front and center. Maggie marched forward, standing at attention, while Westwood placed the medal around her neck. The weight was surprising heavier than expected, both physically and symbolically. By order of the President of the United States, Captain Magdalene Thorne is awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed. Maggie maintained her bearing eyes forward, thinking about her mother standing for ceremony 29 years ago when she received her wings. After the official ceremony came the reception. Handshakes, congratulations, politicians wanting photographs with the hero of the hour. Maggie endured it with grace she'd learned from watching McLeod navigate military bureaucracy for 3 decades. Senator Richard Bishop approached his son, Lieutenant Garrett Bishop, beside him in dress uniform. "Captain Thorne," the senator said, extending his hand, "my son tells me you saved his life." "I helped prevent an ambush, sir. He and his team saved themselves by following abort procedures." Lieutenant Bishop spoke up. "Ma'am, I just want to say we were briefed on the mission afterward. If you hadn't been in position, if you hadn't exposed the conspiracy, my entire team would be dead. I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant. Just do your job with honor. That's what soldiers do." As the reception continued, Maggie slipped away to a quiet corridor. The weight of attention was exhausting. She needed airspace silence. She found herself in front of a memorial wall. Names of soldiers killed in action, carved in marble, thousands of them, spanning decades of conflict. She searched until she found it. Commander Evelyn Patricia Thorne, United States Navy, January 17, 1991. Someone had added a new inscription below. "Equipment homicide, justice served 2019. "Your mother was my flight instructor," a voice said behind her. Maggie turned. General Westwood stood there, also escaped from the reception. "She taught me that excellence wasn't about proving doubters wrong. It was about flying the mission so well that capability became undeniable." Westwood studied the memorial. "When she died, I felt like we'd lost our best advocate, someone who showed rather than argued, who demonstrated rather than demanded. She was good at that. So are you. 43 confirmed kills. Not because you're trying to prove anything, because you're protecting people." Westwood paused. "Have you thought about the task force?" Maggie touched the medal around her neck. Heavy, permanent, a reminder of one night's work and 28 years of grief transformed into purpose. "I have one question, ma'am. This task force, does it have the authority to investigate anyone, regardless of rank, position, or political connections?" Yes, that's the whole point, to hunt corruption wherever it hides. Then yes, I'll take the command. Westwood smiled. Major Thorne, congratulations on your promotion. Effective immediately. They shook hands in front of Evelyn Thorne's memorial. A passing of mission from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next. 6 months later, Major Maggie Thorne stood in a secure briefing room at Fort Bragg, addressing her newly formed task force. 40 hand-picked personnel investigators, analysts, operators, legal specialists. People who understood that sometimes the biggest threats came from inside. Master Sergeant McLeod sat front row, promoted to Command Sergeant Major, and serving as her senior enlisted advisor. CIA Officer Blackwood, no longer needing cover names, served as intelligence liaison. Dr. Bradford had joined as medical consultant and forensic specialist. Even Sienna Gallagher was attached as open source intelligence analyst. Our mission, Maggie began, is to identify and neutralize internal threats to American military operations. Officers who betray trust. Contractors who prioritize profit over performance. Systems that enable corruption. We are the last line of defense against enemies who wear our uniform. She pulled up the first case file on screen. Eastern European weapons trafficking with suspected involvement of 2 Army colonels and 3 defense contractors. Evidence of kickbacks, falsified testing equipment, failures in combat. This is what killed my mother 28 years ago. This is what almost killed Lieutenant Bishop's team 6 months ago. This is what we stop before it kills anyone else. Maggie looked at her team. Questions? McLeod raised his hand. Rules of engagement, ma'am. We operate within legal authority but outside normal chain of command. We report directly to the Secretary of Defense and congressional oversight. If we find corruption, we expose it, regardless of who it embarrasses. Even if it's politically inconvenient, Blackwood asked. Especially if it's politically inconvenient. That's when corruption hides best behind powerful people who don't want scrutiny. Maggie advanced to the next slide. Our first operation begins in 72 hours. Target is a defense contractor in Virginia supplying communication equipment to special operations. Equipment that's failing at 3 times the expected rate. We're going to find out why. After the briefing, Maggie walked the Fort Bragg grounds. Soldiers training, preparing for deployments, maintaining skills that kept them alive in combat. Good people doing hard jobs, trusting that their equipment worked and their leaders valued their lives more than profit. Her phone buzzed. Encrypted message from an unknown number. Congratulations, Major Thorne. Brennan was middle management. Real architects remain operational. We're watching. Nightfall. Maggie stared at the message. Not a threat, an acknowledgement. Somewhere in the network of corruption that Brennan served, larger players operated. People sophisticated enough to avoid exposure, powerful enough to survive investigation. They were watching her, assessing whether she was a real threat or just another political appointment that would fade after the headlines moved on. She deleted the message and made a mental note to have Blackwood track its origin. Let them watch, let them underestimate. That was her advantage. Sunday afternoon, Maggie drove to Arlington National Cemetery. She'd been avoiding this visit knowing it would hurt, knowing it would open wounds that ceremony and medals couldn't heal. Her mother's grave was in Section 60, surrounded by other warriors who died in service. The headstone was new, replaced after the investigation concluded. Commander Evelyn Patricia Thorne, United States Navy. First female F-14 fighter pilot killed in action, Desert Storm, 1991. Equipment, homicide, justice served, 2019. Clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. The last line was her mother's personal motto, something she'd told Maggie every night before bed when she was small. Maggie knelt, placing fresh flowers on the grave. I got him, Mom. Got the promotion. Got the command. Got the chance to make sure no one else dies the way you did. The words felt inadequate. 28 years of grief, rage, and determination couldn't be summarized in a graveside conversation. I don't know if I'm doing this right. The task force, the investigation, all of it. But I'm trying to be half the officer you were, half the person. Wind rustled through the trees, peaceful, quiet. Nothing like the screaming chaos of combat. McLeod says you'd be proud. Hartwell says I'm just like you. Westwood says I'm carrying on your legacy. Maggie touched the headstone. I just want you to know I haven't forgotten, haven't forgiven, and I won't stop until the entire system is clean. She stood saluting her mother's grave with the precision of a soldier who understood ceremony mattered. Her phone buzzed again. McLeod, target secured. Equipment testing reveals systematic failure. Contractor records show falsified safety data. You were right. First case, first win, first step toward making the system work the way it was supposed to. Maggie looked at her mother's headstone one more time. Mission continues, Commander. We've got work to do. She walked back to her car past rows of graves holding warriors who'd given everything for country duty and each other. Some died in combat, some died from betrayal disguised as acceptable loss. Her job was making sure future graves came only from the former, never the latter. The drive back to Fort Bragg took 2 hours. Time to think, to plan, to prepare for the war ahead. Not the war in Afghanistan or Iraq or any foreign battlefield. The war against corruption that hid in shadows and profited from death. It was a different kind of combat. But Maggie Thorne had proven she could fight any battle. Her mother taught her that. Brennan proved it fatal to forget. And now 40 personnel followed her into fights that would never make headlines, but would save lives all the same. As she pulled into Fort Bragg, the sun set behind her, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Beautiful. Temporary. Gone in moments. Like her mother, like Brennan, like every soldier who'd ever worn the uniform. But some things endured. Honor, duty, sacrifice. The willingness to stand against darkness even when easier to look away. Maggie Thorne was her mother's daughter, and she was just getting started.